Very happy to be chatting with you, with all of you about this today. We're going to talk about 5 common Argo CD issues and how to fix them today. And some of these are going to be dead simple, but I literally run into them all the time with people. And actually, of these 5 common issues, there's actually a couple of examples in some of them. So there's kind of some bonuses in here. So stick around for that. And as if you have questions, throw them in the chat. We're watching it, and I want to call those out, and I'll respond to you. And if you say, hey, that's dumb, then I'll probably ignore you. But if you say that's awesome, then I'll say this person gets it. So with that, we'll jump in. So let me introduce myself very briefly. My name is Dan Garfield. I'm the VP of Open Source here at Octopus Deploy. I am a co-founder of CodeFresh, and we were recently acquired by Octopus Deploy way back in March. And so we're bringing together the best of continuous delivery into one house. I'm an Argo maintainer, and I would say I'm a co-creator of GitOps as a standard. If you're familiar with the GitOps principles, if you've ever read those, a lot of those things that's stuff that I helped put together and help write, and that's an initiative that I worked a lot on. So hopefully you got some value out of that. Now, I mentioned that I am an Argo maintainer, but a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today is stuff that I've run into in the course of having our users at CodeFresh, at Octopus, who are Argo users, using us for support, contacting us because they have issues. And so some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today is stuff that I've literally seen, and I'll have some stories for you without embarrassing anybody. Of course, huge shout out to all of our wonderful customers and users. And some of these issues are things that I've seen in the community as well. So before we jump into those 5 issues, I do want to highlight that the reason that there's a lot of the reason that we have so much exposure to this is because we offer enterprise support for Argo coming from CodeFresh, coming from Octopus Deploy. And so this includes dedicated technical account management, priority bug fixes from Argo maintainers. And we are the #1 security contributors for Argo CD. We actually do more security patches than anybody, and we're very aggressive on that to keep the platform secure. We cover the entire Argo project, and of course, we offer 24/7 global support. So if you're interested in that, and really the change, and one of the reasons we wanted to do this video today is because this level of enterprise support previously was only available to CodeFresh users, so people using our platform, the enterprise platform that we built for Argo. And now we're opening up and saying, hey, if you're just using Argo community version, open source, then you can contact us. We'll do support for you, and you can get all the access to all this stuff that our customers have been enjoying for years and years at this point. So feel free to go to codefresh.io/enterprise Argo support, or you can scan that QR code if you're interested and set up or request some information. And the other thing, and I think many of you already know this, but we are also the #1 trainers for people using Argo and GitOps. So if a lot of you have already done the Argo, the GitOps certification for Argo that we put out, and if you haven't, there are currently 2 levels. There are GitOps fundamentals and GitOps at scale, and we're offering a 60% off code there, the iHeart GitOps 1 that you can use. There is a limit on that, and it does expire. So feel free, go and use it right now. Send it to some friends. Forward it on if you haven't done it. It is the most popular GitOps with Argo training that there is. Most popular GitOps training, most popular Argo training there is. And I think we have over 25,000 students at this point. So it's growing really, really rapidly. And we build a lot of the foundations for how to use Argo, how to structure your Git repositories, how to think about promotions from one environment to another. All of that stuff is baked into the certification. So go try it out. And level 3 is going to be coming out, I think, this quarter. So expect it, between now and KubeCon. There's not a ton of time left, but I think we're gonna work on getting it done as quickly as possible, and we've made a lot of progress already. All right. So with all of that stuff, let's start getting into our issues. And the first one that we're going to talk about are sync issues. Now, like I mentioned, some of these things are pretty simple. Some of these things are pretty basic, but we're going to try them out. So let's jump in. And you can see I've got an Argo instance running here. This is running 2.12. This is just the latest stable version. Let's see. I'm going to save this guy for a little bit later and just delete that. Let's see. I meant to put it as non-cascading, but I think we're going to find because we weren't managing those. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Like I said, feel free to ask questions as we go along. So the first one that we're going to do is an application that is forever progressing or degraded. And so for that one, we're going to look at, let's see, this one. This one is one resources. So here's an example where this is currently out of sync. Now, all of these have just been, the applications have been created, but they have not been synced yet. So let's go ahead and hit sync on this. We're going to sync all the resources. And I'm using kind of a zoomed in interface to hopefully make it easier to see, but sometimes it does make the interface just a little bit wonky. I'll zoom out just a smidge there. All right, so we've just synced this, and the sync is okay. So that means it was able to apply the manifest, but it is going to sit in progressing, and it is going to sit in progressing for a long time because this one has an issue. Now, this is one that I've seen. I mean, you'd be shocked how often I see this one. If we look at this one and we, normally when you have an issue, you look at the sync result and it's just going to say, yeah, everything's synced. Everything is synced just fine. What do you want? And if you look at the progressing, it doesn't send you anywhere. And if we just look through, we can see that this deployment is progressing, but there are no events on this. There's no logs on this. And so this issue gets a lot of people just because they don't know where to look. Now, in this case, if we drill down, okay, this deployment has issues. If we go down to this pod and we look at it, we're going to see that there actually is an event on here, which is that there are not enough nodes available, one insufficient CPU. Now, this is super common because people will start loading everything up onto their cluster and they'll just run out of resources. And you would be surprised how many times people contact us and they're like, hey, my stuff isn't deploying. It's just stuck in progressing. Now, if we look at this, we're going to see exactly why. We're actually out of CPU. If I go back to my deployment and I look at this, I'm going to see that it's actually making a resource request. Let's look at the desired manifest because it's just a little bit shorter. You can see that we actually are looking for 10,000 CPU. Okay, so that's a lot of CPU. So let's chill out about that. So this is just an example of what it looks like when you don't have enough resources. So let us, I actually have this set up as an argument in the parameters for this. So we can actually just go ahead and edit this down and say, we only need like 100. So let's save that. Now, here I'm just editing it through the UI, which is another issue that we see quite often. I'm going to hit sync on this now that it has the new parameter on it. And you'll see that immediately this pod is able to schedule and everything is healthy. Now, as we go through here, the issue, we're going to be editing stuff in the UI. That is a very common mistake that we see people doing where they're just used to editing stuff in the UI. When you save an application in the UI, it goes into the Kubernetes cluster and that's it. So it's not saved to Git. It's not backed up by anything. And so this is one of the reasons that people really like the CodeFresh platform for using GitOps, because every UI change that you make is actually saved to Git and then synced automatically. So we don't have the issue of our work being potentially lost. But for today's demo, it's fine. We're gonna be doing this in the UI because it's easy to follow this way, and we're focusing on answering common issues. I see there's a lot of discussion going on about the certification. A lot of people saying they like it. Somebody was asking if looks like Iraqi was asking, is that certification free? It is not free. We actually need to cover the cost of the labs because the certification is not just a test. It's a bunch of training with a bunch of labs. And so that means we're paying for machines for people to connect and run this stuff. So you'll need it. And Laurent mentioned that if you need a coupon, if you're already a CodeFresh customer or an Octopus customer, reach out to your AE or your CSM and they can help you get that bundle as part of your subscription. Okay, so let's go to number 2. Number 2 is going to be fighting controllers. So this is an example. of an application that is never going to get synced. So I have it set up in manual sync. Most often we see this issue in automated sync, but let's go ahead and hit sync on it because you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. So if I hit sync on this, you're going to see that it syncs immediately. It gets synced, and then it gets out of sync. So the sync was okay. So we can see that the sync completed, everything ran fine, and the app is healthy, but it's out of sync. And if I run sync again, let's run the sync again. It's going to sync again, and it's going to get out of sync again. How is it getting out of sync? What is going on here? And this one I do have a funny story about. So this, yeah, my dog loves the presentation. I'll make a note about that. If you could you take the dog out? He's very loud on my stream. All right. So what we've got here is an issue where this resource keeps on getting out of sync. Now, if we go and look at this and we look at the diff to tell us, it's that this replica number keeps on getting changed to 0 every time we sync it. And so this is a very, very common issue because a lot of people love using controllers in Argo CD. So this one would be an example of what a pod autoscaler would be doing. It's automatically scaling this pod down because it doesn't think it's needed, or it's automatically scaling it up. And so the issue here is really that it's not that this is working incorrectly, it's that it's incorrectly, it's that Argo CD doesn't know who's supposed to be in charge of this field. So you have two controllers that are working, Argo CD, who's applying the resources, and a pod autoscaler that is changing the value of replicas to no longer match what our desired state was. So Argo CD and the pod autoscaler are going to keep on fighting. And a pod autoscaler is just one example. There are tons of controllers out there that modify resources. So Kyverno does it. It adds different values and annotations on things. There's just a ton of controllers out there. And so this issue of seeing something that's constantly going into sync and resync status is an example of what you would expect to see. So to fix this, what we're going to do is we're going to edit this application. And again, I'm going to do this inside of Argo CD, even though I would tell you that, normally I use CodeFresh to do this. And so anything I did would be saved into Git automatically. But we're going to do this again, just in the Argo UI, even though we know that it's not going to, it's not going to actually fix it in the end. So it's not going to be saved into Git. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add an ignore differences on this guy, and I'm indented too much. There we go. So this is an option you have in Argo CD to add, and I'll set back the resolution here, to set your ignore differences. And what this is going to say is that on this deployment, we want to ignore any differences to the replicas. Now, why do we want to do that? We want to do that because we are delegating the control of this source to a pod autoscaler. And anytime that you're doing something like this, I would recommend that you make a comment to say what you're delegating this control over this field to. So if I save this, and looks like it got saved okay, and I sync it, you're going to see it's actually already marked as synced, right? Because it no longer considers the change to the pod, the deployment, the number of replicas as a difference to be seen. So we can see that, it's still at 0 replicas. That hasn't changed, but it is now trusting the pod autoscaler to take over. Okay. Now this issue is sort of funny because I've seen, I saw a user one time who they were like, we have migrated everything into Argo CD and it is pandemonium. It is always syncing. It's always flipping out. It's always doing stuff. And we went in there and looked, and we said, okay, you've got like 10 controllers running. You have not added ignore differences on any of these things. You have auto sync turned on with self-heal turned on. And so Argo CD is just fighting those controllers, and CPU is just running at max for everybody to fight each other for control over those resources. So that's an example of fighting controllers. So we did forever progressing, we did fighting controllers. Let's do broken YAML. So this is an example where we've got an application that is not going to sync. So you can see that it's actually got the resources. It's seen what's going to it sees that there's a service and a deployment. But when we hit synchronize on this, it's going to fail. And even though it sees what resources need to be created, it's not able to do it. And so when we click on the sync failure, it's going to show that this wasn't able to apply. And it's going to give us an error about which part of the spec is incorrect. And so if we go and look at the source for this application, so let's see, we've got, oh, well, what is my sync result? I'm sorry. That's not what I need to look at. But let's look at this file. So this is, let's look at the details here. So this guy's pointing at this broken YAML path. Shocker, the broken YAML is broken. And if I edit this and I look through here, it actually told me which section was messed up. It was, let's see. What did it tell me? It told me that the metadata labels had an invalid value. So there's something wrong with my YAML where it's incorrectly indented. And if I pull up it, it's hard to look at from this size. So let me look at, when I ran through this, I was like, oh man, this is so easy to spot when I looked at it, but I wasn't looking at it all zoomed in right here. I actually even, added a spot where it says bad indent. That's funny. All right. So literally, this is just what it looks like when you have YAML that just can't be applied. And so this is probably the most common issue that people run into and get used to fixing the most rapidly. So if I refresh this guy, we should see that it needs to be synced. We'll synchronize it, and sync is okay. Everything ran just fine. Okay. So that one's pretty easy. So these are just common sync issues. Nothing too crazy yet. Hopefully, we're going to get a little bit nuttier. We'll see how y'all feel about it. And keep those comments coming. Really appreciate it. And appreciate when you see stuff you like, or if you're confused about something, or if you just give me a thumbs up, like, hey, that looked good, or makes sense, or got it, just lets me know that you're paying attention and not just talking to myself. It's nice. Oh, where do you get this awesome looking coffee mug? That's a good question, Rune. This is a special CodeFresh Argo mug, and we gave these to all of the Argo maintainers, but we do probably have some extra ones that we'll give out at ArgoCon and KubeCon this year. Don't hold me to that, but I think we do. So we'll see if we can make it happen. All right, so let's go to number 2. So this one is going to be an example of migrating an application into Argo CD. And I get this question all the time. We have a cluster. It already has stuff deployed. We want to get it deployed out and migrated, everything migrated into Argo CD. How do I do that? So the app that I'm going to be migrating in is Argo CD itself. Now, a lot of people don't know you can use Argo CD to manage itself as an application, and it is awesome. Okay, so I want to take over management of all of those resources as an application. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to create it in the UI. Now, would I ever do this? No, I would actually create this either using the CodeFresh UI, which will save it to Git, or I will create it in Git directly. I almost never use the UI. I only use the UI when I'm doing demos, ironically. So oftentimes people are like, you don't seem like you know your way around the UI that much. I'm like, I don't really ever use the UI, but let's go ahead and create it. We're going to put it in Argo CD. We're just going to leave part of the default project. Now, very important, when you are migrating an application into Argo CD, always keep it on manual. I always recommend that. Because we're going to be able to see the differences. I'll leave auto create namespace turned on. It doesn't really matter because the namespace already exists. But I just like that feature. And I'm going to grab the I'm going to grab the source, which is going to be the Argo CD repo. And right now it's set to head. We actually are going to change that, but we're going to leave that. We're going to create an issue with it is what we're going to do. And to get this installed, we're going to go to manifests and cluster install. So we're just going to go on down to cluster install. There we go. All right. And I'm going to be installing it onto my local cluster here. And I'm going to be sending it to the Argo CD namespace. Very important. And that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and create this application. Okay. Looks like it's been created. Now, you're going to see that what this has done is it has now found, and I'll zoom out slightly, you can see that it's actually found all of the resources that exist. It's found on my pods. I can actually go in and look at my logs already. So I can actually gain access to just reviewing all these resources right away. But I haven't synced anything. So I haven't actually changed any of the files. Now, if I look at these, let's do a little preview. So if I tap on this config map and I look at this diff, you can see that it's going to add a label to specify that this is being managed by the Argo CD application called Argo CD. And if I look down at let's look at these. And when you do this, when you migrate, I strongly recommend going through and looking at all the diffs. So for example, we have the annotation, the label that I expected. And depending on your tracking method, you can actually change the tracking method that Argo CD uses to track your applications. By default, it's going to be a label, but you can use an annotation or an annotation plus label. There's a bunch of options there. You can see I actually have some other diffs in here that I didn't expect, right? And so, for example, my current version is pointed to 2.12, but it wants to point me at latest. Okay, so I didn't expect that. He said, totally expecting that. Now, the reason I expected that is because when I created this application, and actually, let's just look at the manifest. When I created this application, I told it to sync to head, and I actually want it to sync to stable, which is what I have installed, right? So it's going to be a different revision. And now if I run a refresh really quick, click on my deployment, now I can see that the only diff is that it's adding this label. So migrating an application into Argo CD, very straightforward. I can sync this now, and it's going to automatically just add that label everywhere. And now Argo CD is managing itself. And now if I want to upgrade Argo CD, I can literally just go and change which revision it's pointing to, and it will automatically deploy it. And I actually use, I really strongly recommend this style of managing Argo CD applications, managing Argo CD with itself. And now this means that I have Argo CD as an app. And for any app, it doesn't matter if it's Argo CD, any kind of resources you have, you can always add them by doing this. And always start with manual sync I'll always start it with manual sync so you can preview the differences and deal with any issues. And you may find that you have some differences you want to ignore, like we saw in that last example. Okay, so that's great. We've got all these applications set up now. What is our next issue we're going to be looking at? This one is application sets. Now, this one, I wanted to build a nice demo for it, but I actually think it's easier just to explain than it is to demo in real time. So we'll explain it very, very simply. So if I go over here and look at, for those of you that aren't familiar with application sets, okay, application sets are a way of creating a configuration that will generate tons of applications. And you can use all kinds of things to generate applications. So you can use a Git repositories. So for every Git repository, generate an application. You can do a mix and match. So you can say, I have a list of values and a Git repository for each combination, I want an application. You can do a cluster generator. So for each cluster that Argo CD is connected and managing, generate applications. And there's an example that I did with a fellow named Luke from the New York Times. They're big Argo CD users, where they set up an application set using a pull request generator. So this is set up so that every single pull request that they have is automatically used to generate applications. And that means they can very easily create preview environments using Argo CD and this simple of a configuration. And by the way, if you want a lesson on how to do this, go do the certification. And on level 3, which is coming out soon, we're actually going to have a great example of how to do this that explains all the mechanics of it and goes in depth on it. And you'll be able to do it as an exercise and run your application sets for preview environments. Super cool. Now, when they did this, they didn't have a label specified. So that meant every single pull request, even if they didn't want a preview environment, would generate an application. And on their repository, they actually had quite a few. I think it was more than 89. By default, it's only going to be on open pull requests. Now, you can specify it for closed pull requests too, but I don't think you want to. But this example caused a crazy error, which is in the application set controller logs. It actually popped up and said that they were being rate limited by GitHub because they ran out of API requests. This is not uncommon for people as they scale with Argo CD to run into the issue of overwhelming the Git API. And so one of the things that they had done a couple of things. They had actually modified the application set arguments to make it try to run more rapidly. And of course, this just saturated the API even more. And so what they recommended was that, and you can see, I mean, you get 15,000 requests per hour by default if you're on a GitHub Enterprise organization. That's for your whole organization, right? So you could saturate that really rapidly if you had enough, pull requests, because you have to think it actually has to pull every single pull request, and then for each pull request, it needs to go and pull in each of those individually, all their files, so that it can feed that into the application set generator. So what they recommended was, you probably should you should avoid reducing any of the queuing settings. And they also recommended using webhooks. Now, webhooks are sometimes misunderstood in GitOps. In the GitOps principles, and if we actually, I mean, we can pull those up really quick. So in the GitOps principles, one of the values says that things need to be pulled automatically. So software agents automatically pull the desired state and declarations. And it needs to always be monitoring that. And so this is sometimes understood to mean you're not allowed to use webhooks. That's not what it means. What it means is you're not allowed to rely exclusively on webhooks. So if we took our example here and we said, we can actually say only run the application set organically, once a day, and otherwise rely on webhooks, that means that we will get eventual consistency. If a webhook fails, your resources will eventually show up, right? So it's actually going to work better that way, right? So if you use the webhook, you can actually trigger an individual run on these things. And Eduardo brings up a great point. We can highlight that. He says, even with webhooks, you will get the same rate limit error. The implementation for the application set webhook has like n squared runtime. I had to implement a custom one that has some sane defaults to avoid running out of API calls. Yeah, you can tweak how often the application sets are being refreshed, but it's good. It's a good reminder that application sets are not necessarily tuned to the scale that some people want to use them for. And so that is something that we might have to do some improvements on. And there is some great tooling, and maybe we'll do a session dedicated to debugging application sets, like the next time we do one of these. Because there's some great tooling that we've just come out with and we're coming out with in this next version of Argo CD to simplify the experience of debugging our application sets. Whereas previously, the only way people that could debug them is just to commit them and then see what happens. And that's like kind of a nightmare. So now we can dry run and run those things locally first. So if you want to watch this full talk and we get really deep into application sets, this is the YouTube link. You can scan the QR code. This is a talk that Luke and I gave in Paris back in March, and it was a lot of fun. And we show some examples of really wild and crazy application sets. And we also we used application sets to generate infinite applications and to measure kind of some of the impact of how that works and what kind of issues would be caused. Okay. All right, so let's go into number 4, app lost. So this is an example that I see happen sometimes, which is really comes down to not understanding the difference between Argo CD management and Kubernetes management. So let's let's create a new application, and I'm going to call this orphan. I'm going to call it Lost App, Lost Parent App, and I'm going to just leave this in the default project. Keep it on manual. Manual is easier to demo, and then I need to grab. Where is my? I'm going to be pointing at the example repo that I used to make this presentation, and I'll share that link later too if you don't catch it. And then I have this example YAML Argo app. Here we go. And I'm going to put this one in the demo. I'm going to point it at the demo branch because that's what I want to edit. Deploying to the local namespace. And this one is actually this application contains an Argo CD application. So I'm going to deploy it to the Argo CD namespace. So I'll go ahead and create that. And when I open this up, you're going to see that it's only resources to generate an application. And if I click on this, it's not going to show it to me because the app hasn't been created yet. So let's go ahead and sync this. And now that I've got this synced, we can jump to the application and we can see that I actually have a number of resources that exist. Now, these resources only exist because I previously orphaned them. So the way I did that is I deleted them. I did a non-cascading deletion, and that left the resources intact. Now, even if I delete this application, if I go back to my parent app, it's still here. It's showing up as missing. And so we can just resync this to get the application back. And again, because those resources were just orphaned, it's going to automatically just find those resources and reattach to them. Okay. Now, this example is about losing track of resources, losing track of an application. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go and we're going to modify this example application. And this is something I see people do all the time where they say, oh, I actually misnamed this thing. I'm just going to change the name. So we're going to call it new. And let's go ahead and commit that. And when I do that, and I go back to my parent application, let's see where it is. And let's go ahead and refresh this. Uh-oh. You can see that it has specified that I'm actually going to be creating a new application. It's not renaming the application. That's because you can't rename an application in Argo CD. So if you need to rename an application, and even if I sync this, go ahead and sync this, see what happens. And I go to this application, you're going to see now, let's see. Oh, it's missing. Wait a second. Sync this up. Okay, wait a second. How did it get all these resources already? What's going on? Well, I've created a situation where now this application is managing the same resources across these two apps. So if I decide to delete this lost app, and this time I'm going to do a foreground deletion, not a non-cascading deletion. When I do that and I go to my parent application, it's now going to see that other one is gone. It wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. But when I look at my new application, remember I renamed it, all the resources. Let's see, did my tunnel just crash? Yeah, my network tunnel just, oh, there it goes. It's coming back. Okay. You can see that, oh, well, now they've come back again. Wah, wah. All right, so it's recreated them for me, so we're good. So the way that if you need to move an application from one name to another, what you would do is you would first do a delete non-cascading, then you would create the new application, and then you would deploy from there. Oh, so actually, I realize now. Sorry, in my demo, I meant to make sure that these resources had the same names, and I accidentally followed the best practice and had them attached, generating their name based off of the name of the Argo application. So they were they were never in any danger. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. That probably got a little confusing. But basically, the long and short of it is that deleting or changing the name of an application actually just generates a new application. And so if you need to change the name of an application, you basically need to go to the process of pruning. Yes, Ronkill brings it up. You can prune to delete the old application, but if it's sharing the same resources as your new application name, then it will delete all those resources. Now, you'll get a warning from Argo CD that tells you that those two applications are managing the same resources. So it would have shown a warning had they been using the same resources. But yeah, if you're going to prune, you will accidentally delete the resources you didn't mean to, and you'll leave a new duplicate in place. And so if we go through and we just edit that name over and over again, we'll just see applications stacking up, and we can go and sync those applications individually. But it creates issues. So this is an issue that I commonly see where people just expect that they can, edit an application name and have it just work. And of course, it causes issues. Okay, let's go to number 5. Number 5 is going to be adding cluster failure, and we're also going to cover bad permissions. So right now, so far, everything I've done with all these applications has been to deploy to a local cluster. And you can actually see I have that in cluster right here. And I also have this remote cluster. Let's go ahead and delete this for now. Bye-bye. All right. Now, if I want to add a new cluster in Argo CD, it's very easy. All I have to do is run an Argo CD cluster add. And I'm going to now look at this command here. I'm going to run cluster add kind remote cluster kubectl, and then I'm going to pass in the kubectl that I'm using, and this name has to come from that kubectl. So if you're not passing in a kubectl and you just specify a name, it'll pull from your default kubectl in your path. And then I'm also specifying which namespace I want it to be allowed to deploy to. Now, the way that this works, and let me show you just like if I run this command. Now, it shouldn't be a shocker to you. This is going to do some things, but it's going to fail ultimately, right? Now, it's not a shocker. It's labeled broken, so it should be broken. But you can see that it's actually reached out to this remote cluster, and it has created a service account in Kube system. It's created a role. It's created a role binding for it. And then it tries to actually add this cluster to my Argo CD instance to start managing, but it's going to fail. Why does it fail? Well, it says right here that it can't get this URL. And eagle-eyed viewers, all of you will already know why. But just to show you, for example, let's say that let's actually just get, let's actually just run a command and make sure that I can access it. See, I can access this cluster, but for some reason, Argo CD can't. Now, eagle-eyed viewers will notice that it's because it's trying to reach out to the local host, right? So trying to reach the local host, trying to reach this Kubernetes cluster from Argo CD when it's looking for local host is never going to get anything but itself. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that cluster that we're connecting to is accessible from the Argo CD instance. Now, to do that, I have already prepared a new fixed remote cluster permission here. Let's go. And here it's going to recreate all the role bindings, but you can see that it's now going to a public IP address. Now, this issue of trying to connect to clusters that are on different networks or behind firewalls or things like that, it's not something that CodeFresh users have to deal with too much because we have a control plane for Argo CD. And so you can actually deploy Argo CD behind the firewall and use a single interface to manage all of your applications and instances. And so this isn't something that comes up with our users too often, but it is something that I see from the community quite often. If you're interested in deploying to a cluster that's just behind the firewall and you're using you're not using, CodeFresh, GitOps, you just want to use something that's out in the community, there is a project, Argo Tunnel, or Argo Agent, Argo Project Labs, Argo Agent, that is nearing maturity. that is basically a way where it will deploy a essentially repo server along with a network tunnel onto the remote cluster so you can manage it that way. Now, I've added my cluster. So if we refresh this, we're going to see we've got our kind remote cluster. And you can see the connection status is unknown. Now, the reason for this is because Argo CD is efficient. Argo CD, we've added the cluster, but Argo CD doesn't have any job to go and refresh any information from that cluster. Let me refill my mug. Because there's nothing deployed to it. So we're going to now go ahead and try to deploy to it. And what we're going to do, we're going to create a new application. And we're going to call this remote app. And I'm going to just leave this in the default project, right? Now, this restricted one exists, but I'm not allowed to deploy into it. That's why it's called restricted. But you can create project names with anything you want. We're going to leave it on manual. We're going to tell it to auto create the namespace, just like I pretty much always do. And then for this one, we're going to go ahead and use the example apps repository that I rely on so heavily. And we could really deploy any application, but we're going to use this Helm guest book. It's a nice popular one. And here we're going to specify the cluster by IP. And for the namespace, we're going to say new remote namespace. It's a great namespace. Now, one other thing about this is we ever did this YAML. You're going to see it actually has both a name field has been created under destination instead of a server field. So this name is what I usually use and I recommend to use because I don't have to care if an IP address changes. Oh my gosh, I just did all of that and I clicked away for a second. I'm sorry. That's okay. I got it right here. All right. Oh, I even put finalizers on this. That's fine. Doesn't matter. All right. So let's go ahead and create this in the new namespace. And we'll save this out. Okay. So now that I've created this application, where'd it go? That's my lost parent app. That's our fighting controllers. I thought I created the application. Did I not? What is this called? Oh, it's called remote app. That's fine. Oh, I think I clicked away from it before it completed saving. Sorry, my bad. Looks like my network tunnel is having a little conniption here. It's thinking about it. Did you forget to press create? No, I hit create, didn't I? Did it time out? Look. Yeah. Let's refresh this really quick. Too hard refresh. Okay. No, it's coming through okay. Go ahead and... Oh, I forgot to hit save. That's what I forgot to do. I'm sorry. All right. So now we've got our remote app. We can see that it's actually throwing an error already. And what is this error? It's that I don't have permission to this namespace. Now, this is different than RBAC for Argo CD, because in Argo CD RBAC, it would have rejected the creation of this application. And if I forced it into the Kubernetes API, it literally wouldn't even show up in the UI. It would just ignore it entirely because it violates RBAC. But in this case, it's not Argo CD RBAC that's limiting it. It's actually my service account that's limiting it. Remember, because when I created this thing, I told it that I should be limited to the default namespace. Now, there's two ways to solve this. I could re-add this, and I could actually add in additional namespaces, or I can edit this and just tell it to go to a namespace that I do have permission for. And if I save that, then of course I'd miss the error's gone and I can sync it just fine. So the most common issues we see with adding clusters is not having permission to do so. and then not setting the permissions properly when you actually add the cluster. Now, notice this is the only command that I've run this entire time. There's not an option in Argo CD to add a cluster from the UI. You see, there's no add new cluster button. And that actually is a fairly popular feature request from people. Now, the reason that we don't do it, and we actually tested this in CodeFresh, where we actually added the ability for people to do this manually. People hated it. People did not like doing it manually. The reason that this works really well is from my CLI, I have a kube config set up already. And so I'm not using the permissions of that kube config. I'm not giving those permissions to Argo CD. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm using the permissions that I have to go and create a service account with a role and a role binding that is then added through a job to Argo CD, right? So that means I can do this locally because I have access to do it locally, but Argo CD doesn't have access to do it. And so I would need to upload my kube config to Argo CD, have it execute all its commands, and then delete my kube config. And we actually did that experience in CodeFresh where people could basically upload their own kube config manually, and they did not like it. It caused a lot more problems than it solved. And so we said, you know what, let's just stick with use the CLI to do it. It's a lot easier, and most people have Kubernetes experience. All right. Looks like I have a shout out from Rune here about no coffee, Dan. Thank you, Rune, for the shout out. That it is true. There is no coffee. Now, one of the other things, and this is not, today's session is not about like, oh, here's how you debug everything in Argo CD. But just a little bonus here. Since I'm managing Argo CD using Argo CD, this means I can very easily go down and actually access my pods to look at my logs, right? So you can see I've got my application set controller here. I've got my notifications. I've got Redis. I've got repo server. Now, repo server is what does the job. Honestly, 95% of the work that Argo CD does is all in repo server. So repo server is responsible for going and rendering manifests. It's responsible for connecting to Kubernetes clusters and executing on them. And so if we look in here, we're going to see every single action it's gone to go through and try to generate applications. And so if I run into issues with applications being applied, this is my first stop of where I'm going to pick logs. My first stop is in the UI to go look or see what the application sync error was or whatever that is. But if that doesn't help me, then this is the next place that I look is going to be repo server. Application sets has its own controller, and so we would view those logs. Now in this case, there's not going to be a whole lot because I actually haven't been running any application sets, so it's just letting me know that it's running. So there's not going to be nothing to dig into in that point. So these are 5 very common issues that I see of just sync issues. And most of these things are pretty simple, and a lot of you have seen these. Now, there are a couple of other scenarios with these that are sort of funny. I mentioned the case where we had a user who did a huge migration of applications with autosync turned on, and then they found out they had all these controllers fighting everything, and it was consuming all their CPU. So that was one example. Another example of something that I saw is instead of using application sets, we had a user who, and I won't say if this is a community user or a CodeFresh Octopus deploy user, could be any kind of user, but this was a user who was using a script to generate all their applications on the fly, and then automatically it would actually just run the CLI command Argo CD app create to create all those applications. And so this was a way that they were creating thousands of applications. Now, of course, nobody else could replicate it because none of that was checked into Git. Again, if you put stuff just into Argo CD, it doesn't go into Git, and if you lose those files, you can no longer create those applications again. So a very risky scenario and setup. And of course, we have the application set controller to do that job anyway of generating applications. So it didn't really make sense to be going through an Argo CD app create thousands of applications. So that was another example of something that was a little wonky. Cool. So I think this was pretty simple. It looks like Rune really liked that the Argo CD as an app. If you haven't seen that pattern before, that's definitely a winner. I also recommend Argo CD Autopilot. If you haven't checked that out, this is a labs project that we did. And this actually creates, it's a CLI that will be you can use to bootstrap Argo CD, set up your Git repository, and then automatically write everything directly into Git when you want to add an application using the CLI. So it's a pretty cool project that gives some of the functionality of what's in CodeFresh to the community. But of course, in CodeFresh, you just get it for free, and you can use it in the UI as well as the CLI. So good call. And then Mario says, if you turn off local user account login in Argo CD and use only LDAP, can you use Argo CD CLI? Yeah. So the Argo CD CLI, when you go to log in, you can log in and you can specify where you want to log in, and you can actually specify SSO, and it will throw you into an SSO login loop to complete that. Yeah, good question. And I'll take a few more questions, so keep them coming. But then, as we come to the end, remember enterprise support from CodeFresh. This is all stuff that we see all the time. Now, truthfully, this is not the stuff that takes up any of our time. This is like the day one stuff that we just see a lot of as people start migrating in. The more complicated stuff tends to be one-off issues where they're scaling and they are hitting different roadblocks because of their specific setup. Maybe they have 10,000 clusters with 10,000 Argo CD instances, and so how they're managing the ingress for the different webhooks that they're trying to handle is complex, and so they need help with that. And we actually offer a hosted ingress as part of the platform, so that helps them. But we've just done this for so long, and we've done it in more industries, more kinds of companies than anybody else on the planet. There's a lot of great Argo maintainers out there. Intuit is a great partner for us, and the creators of Argo who invited us to come in and build the enterprise platform. Red Hat does a great job. But our experience focused on Argo, focused on GitOps, has given us the chance to do this in more kinds of locations, locales, edge clusters, regional clusters, you name it, we've done it. Regulated industries, than anybody else on the planet. So definitely check out that Argo enterprise support. And then if you want to recreate any of these examples that I put in here, they're all just sitting in a Git repo, and maybe we'll add this into the level 1 certification. The level 1 certification has a lot of challenges, but it doesn't actually ever get you to intentionally break an application in the way that we've done here. So maybe might be worth doing. So let us know if you think that's worth doing. Chris asks, with CodeFresh being acquired by Octopus, are we going to see any integration with the two products? Yes, absolutely. That's something that we're working on. But I'll mention a couple of things that I think are interesting right off the bat. So, for example, if you look at edge deployments, so both Octopus and CodeFresh independently of one another have both been fairly popular for deploying to edge. Edge meaning a cluster that is not in a data center, it's on a location. So, for example, a retailer like like a pizza chain or a coffee chain. And I'll say, I'm not telling you anything about our customers specifically, but famously, Chick-fil-A uses a Kubernetes cluster in every store. So does Starbucks. There are others that do that. And we have some of those people as customers. So Octopus Deploy is really good at managing, machines like VMs and hardware machine servers. And there's a multi-tenants feature that's really good for that. But a lot of people will basically use that to bootstrap CodeFresh GitOps or bootstrap Argo CD so that they can then deploy using GitOps on top of it. So already there's a lot of complementary nature to that product, to these two products. And even if you weren't in the same UI, it's actually two different groups that are doing those different use cases typically. So it's usually bootstrapping this stuff as one group, and then they hand over the Argo CD or the CodeFresh GitOps to their users who then are deploying stuff onto those clusters. So that's very common, and you can do it today. But obviously, that's not going to be the stop of integration, and we'll get more exposure. And so pay attention. Follow us on Twitter at Octopus Deploy and CodeFresh to see those. Let's see, LinkedIn user, is there any API to trigger application sync? Yes, you can do it through the CLI. You can just do Argo CD app sync. And of course, the API is exposed, and so you could curl it and just pass a token and do it that way as well. If you're doing it in CI, CodeFresh actually has a built-in CI step for working with Argo CD, and the benefit of that is that it will actually keep permissions in relationship with your Argo CD instance, so you don't have to manage those secrets like you normally would. Joanna says, follow Argo project, github.com/ArgoProj. Thank you for that. Mario, nice, thanks, appreciate it. Kelleen, great presentation and shared resources, Dan and team. I love how the Argo CD UI has evolved over time. Thank you for that. Love to hear it. LinkedIn user, I don't want to use the CLI. Yeah, you can just use the API directly. It's all Swagger API, so you can just access that all, directly. I think we actually have that on in the documentation as well. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. And again, would point you all to CodeFresh Argo support. And if you want to see us do these again, reach out, tell us what you'd like us to talk about. Maybe we should do one just on troubleshooting application sets. I think that'd be a hot topic. Maybe Terraform and Argo. Let us know, and maybe we can get that scheduled.